I tried to be gracious when he cut me loose. I truly did. Grace is easy until someone mistakes it for weakness. Has anyone ever smiled while moving you off the chessboard, not knowing you were the one holding the clock? What would you choose? Silence or strategy? Comment your choice. Tag a friend who understands. And keep listening. Now I tell my story. Please take the time to listen to my confidences, because this is where the comeback begins. My name is Hannah Cole. I am 38 years old, and for 14 years I worked as the Senior Financial Systems Analyst at Stratus Financial Group, a mid-sized investment firm in Chicago where I was born and raised. I had built my reputation on precision, reliability, and the ability to make sense of chaos when everyone else was ready to give up. I was the quiet one who never needed recognition, the woman who showed up early, stayed late, and carried the weight of deadlines that others avoided. I was not flashy. I was not political. I was simply competent. And in corporate America, competence often makes you invisible until the very moment someone decides to erase you. It was March of 2023, the first day for our newly appointed Chief Financial Officer, Ryan Blake. He was 34, a graduate of an Ivy League business school, and walked through the building like it was already his kingdom. My office door was open, but he did not knock. He did not sit down. He stood there in a tailored suit that looked more expensive than the carpet in the executive wing, adjusted his still-creased tie like it had never been worn before, and delivered 4 words with the cold detachment of a cashier handing me a receipt. "Your time is over." He said it with no hesitation, no acknowledgement of my years of service, no recognition of the long nights I had poured into this company. Just 4 words to end a career I had built with loyalty and sweat. I stared at him for 3 long seconds, long enough to take in the arrogance in his stance, the shine of a brand new wristwatch still marked with a faint sticker edge from the jeweler, and the way his eyes avoided mine, as if I was already a ghost he had finished with. In those seconds, I understood exactly what kind of man he was. He believed authority was the same as ability. He believed his degree gave him wisdom. He believed the boardroom was his playground, and the rest of us were toys to be discarded when convenient. And as I sat there, dismissed like a line item in a budget, I felt resentment coil in my chest like a spring. Not just anger at him, but at the years I had given, the sacrifices I had made, the quiet way I had kept this company breathing while others took the credit. But I did not beg. I did not cry. I smiled, smooth and steady, the kind of smile that comes when you know something they do not. I lifted my eyes to his and said calmly, "Good luck with the Q2 numbers." For the first time that morning, he blinked. He expected me to crumble. He expected apologies or desperation. Instead, I gave him composure, and composure unsettles men like him more than rage ever could. Because behind my smile, behind my steady voice, he did not know that the very foundation of his new empire rested on systems I had built, code I had written, and logic he could not begin to understand. He thought he had ended me, but in truth, he had just pressed the first button in a sequence he would never be able to stop. I carried out my own small box of belongings that afternoon, and with each step down the hallway, I felt the strange mix of humiliation and freedom clashing in my chest. 14 years of my life reduced to a cardboard box that held only a coffee mug with the words, "World's Okayest Analyst," a wireless mouse I had bought myself when the company's budget cut corners, and a folded paper star my daughter made me during a tax season so brutal that I had practically lived at the office. There were no plaques, no framed awards, no glossy team photos to decorate the end of my career. Just those 3 things. And as absurd as it sounds, they weighed more than I expected because they carried the reminder of how much I had given and how little I had received back. As I walked, I noticed faces peeking over cubicle walls and glances that lingered longer than usual. Angela from payroll, 42 years old and a woman who knew more company secrets than our legal department, mouthed 2 words as I passed. Big mistake. Her eyes carried the kind of certainty that only comes from experience. I nodded slightly, but kept moving. Then there was Marcus, the security guard at the front desk, a man of 50 with a fatherly patience and a habit of bringing donuts every Friday morning. He tilted his head when I reached the lobby and asked softly, "You good?" I balanced the box on my hip and answered with a calm voice, "Golden." He gave me a look that said he did not believe me, but he let me walk past without another word. The building had been my second home for more than a decade, and as I crossed the lobby, it struck me that I knew every crack in the marble floor, every flicker of the fluorescent lights, every corner where I had once leaned against a wall late at night, trying to solve another impossible problem for people who never even knew my name. Walking out felt like slipping out of my own skin. No ceremony, no farewell party, just silence that echoed against beige walls and carpet that smelled faintly of old glue and ambition gone stale. I thought about the long nights of vending machine dinners, the annual reviews that called me a quiet asset, and the projects that had pushed me to the edge of exhaustion. Quiet asset. That was the phrase they had used. Corporate language for disposable. But I was not disposable. Not really. Because everything that kept Stratus Financial Group alive, the forecasting systems, the algorithms, the conditional models that determine multi-million-dollar decisions, still carried my fingerprints, and no one else in that building had ever asked how it all worked. They only asked that it did. As I pushed through the revolving doors and into the Chicago air, I realized that Ryan Blake believed he had erased me. He believed he had cut out a cog. But what he did not know was that he had just removed the engine, and without it, the entire machine was already beginning to stall. I lifted the box higher under my arm, took a deep breath, and walked toward the parking lot, calm, steady, already knowing that this quiet walk was not an ending. It was the beginning of something they would never see coming. When I pulled out of the company parking lot that day, I did not feel the panic most people expect when their career is cut short. I felt something closer to certainty. I knew something Ryan Blake did not know, something the board had never even bothered to ask. The truth was that the lifeblood of Stratus Financial Group's decision-making rested on a system I had built, brick by brick, over the course of more than a decade. I was not just an analyst who produced charts and numbers. I was the architect of the forecasting engine that shaped every move the company made. And the best part was, no one else truly understood it. It started as a simple project years ago, when one of our previous executives demanded a model that could predict client churn with more accuracy than the usual spreadsheets. I took that request and built something larger, something stronger, something that went beyond churn into behavior. revenue, supply volatility, even tax shifts. By the time the system matured, it was no longer a tool. It was a living architecture that learned, adapted, and recalibrated itself constantly. We called it Forecast Pro on paper, but inside, I always thought of it as the heartbeat of the company. It ran on 5 predictive algorithms layered together, code I had personally written, and logic I had refined late at night with vending machine coffee and the sound of cleaning crews mopping the halls. The irony was that they all relied on it without ever questioning it. The board would look at a neat set of bullet points and pie charts, nod, and make decisions worth millions of dollars. Not one of them ever asked, "How does this system actually work?" They did not care about the engine, only about the pretty dashboard that spit out their answers. Ryan certainly never asked. He assumed that the system would keep humming along without me, as though my 14 years of experience could be replaced by his title and his tie. What he did not know was that I had designed it with rules that guarded against negligence. After the bonus scandal of 2018, when a senior manager tried to manipulate numbers to inflate payouts, I had locked the system down with biometric clearance. My fingerprint, my voice, my credentials. Without those, the model would continue for 72 hours before locking itself tight, requiring the original architect to recalibrate. That was not sabotage. That was protection. Protection they had all agreed to, even if they forgot. So when Ryan cut me loose with 4 careless words, he thought he had removed a cog. What he had really done was rip the engine out of the machine. He thought he had streamlined. What he had really done was put a countdown clock on the heart of the company. And as I drove home through the familiar streets of Chicago, my box of belongings in the passenger seat, I could almost hear the quiet hum of that clock in my head. Tick, tock. 72 hours until silence. 72 hours until the boardroom discovered the difference between confidence and competence. I did not have to lift a finger. All I had to do was wait. The first night after I walked out of Stratus Financial Group, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea, my laptop open, and the silence of my house wrapped around me like a blanket. Most people would have been panicking by then, searching for job postings, calling friends, or drowning their anger in a glass of whiskey. I did none of those things. I simply opened a secure portal I had built years ago for redundancy, and there it was. The heartbeat of the system pulsing in rows of code and log files. At 9:42 p.m., the first entry appeared. Attempted access. Result denied. Countdown to recalibration, 71 hours and 59 minutes. My tea tasted sweeter than usual because I knew what that line meant. It meant the clock had already started. I leaned back in my chair and smiled without joy, just a kind of calm that only comes when the future is already written. The system was not broken. It was behaving exactly as I had designed it. Every hour without proper credentials was 1 hour closer to full lockdown. It was not revenge. It was protocol. A protocol I had written to protect the company from dishonesty and ignorance. Ryan Blake had walked into his new role blind, and he had swung his axe without looking at the roots. Now those roots were tightening around him, and he did not even know it. By Sunday morning, the log showed 4 more attempts. Unauthorized credentials. Overrides rejected. Each time, The system responded like a loyal guard dog snapping at a stranger's hand. I sat at my dining room table, watching the entries scroll by, and thought about all the times I'd been called quiet in my performance reviews, as if quiet was a weakness instead of a weapon. Quiet people see everything. Quiet people build things others take for granted. And sometimes, quiet people leave behind ticking time bombs disguised as systems, not out of cruelty, but because we were never asked to do otherwise. On Monday, I imagined Ryan standing in front of his team, pretending everything was fine. He probably straightened his tie, flashed that plastic grin, and reassured them with buzzwords. Streamlined insights, modernized delivery, raise the bar. I could almost hear his voice echoing in the conference room. But behind the mask, the panic would already be setting in. He would see the data flicker, dashboards freezing, numbers refusing to update. He would tell himself it was just a glitch. But by then the countdown would be down to 48 hours, and no amount of arrogance could stop the system from doing exactly what it was built to do. I closed my laptop and stared out the window at the quiet street outside. A neighbor was walking their dog. A delivery truck rolled by. The world looked ordinary, but I knew somewhere downtown, in a glass-walled office filled with expensive chairs and shallow smiles, the first cracks were forming. And I did not have to lift a finger. All I had to do was keep watching the clock. By Monday afternoon, the first real cracks began to show, not in the system, but in the people trying to use it. I was sitting at my kitchen counter with a second cup of coffee when the mirrored log feed I had configured years ago showed another flurry of entries. Access denied, override attempt rejected, credential mismatch. Each failure was time-stamped, each one a reminder that Ryan Blake had no idea what he was up against. I could almost hear the frustration building in that polished conference room 6 miles away. It was not long before I saw the first internal chatter slip through the cloud backup. Stratus's analysts used a shared workspace that synced automatically, and because I had designed the system's retention protocols, I still had access to the backflow of communications. It was not spying. It was insurance. A junior analyst named Lena Parker, 27, had written, "The numbers look off. Is anyone else seeing this?" Another voice replied, "System keeps pulling old data. Could be permissions?" And then silence. The kind of silence that happens when no one wants to say what they are all thinking. I smiled into my coffee. The silence was louder than any alarm bell. Later that evening, I imagined Ryan pacing his office, dismissing every warning with a wave of his hand. That was his style. Confidence over competence. He probably told the team something about legacy glitches and promised he would streamline the process. I had heard him use the word streamline twice in his first week, and I wondered if he even knew what it meant beyond sounding impressive in a meeting. What he did not realize was that the model he called outdated was the very thing keeping the board from making blind decisions. He had built his career on appearances, but the system I had built was about truth, and truth does not bend to ego. By Tuesday morning, the whispers had spread. In one channel, someone asked bluntly, "Why does the lockout screen say Hannah's name?" Another answered cautiously, "Because she built the model?" The thread went quiet after that, like everyone was suddenly afraid their messages were being watched. But the damage was done. My absence had become visible, undeniable, and it carried weight. 14 years of being called quiet, reliable, steady, had finally revealed what those words really meant. I was the foundation. Remove me, and the walls began to shake. I leaned back in my chair and let the satisfaction wash over me. Not gloating, not revenge for the sake of it, but the quiet vindication of knowing the truth was finally visible. Ryan thought he had erased me, but what he had really done was give me a louder voice than I ever had while sitting inside those walls. And the cracks were only the beginning. Soon, the silence would not just whisper my name, it would shout it across every floor of that company until no one could ignore it again. Thursday morning arrived like the first roll of thunder before a storm. I was already awake when the logs lit up at 7:42 a.m. A string of frantic entries scrolled across the screen of my laptop. Access denied. Biometric credentials missing. Override attempt rejected. Then the final line. System locked. Authorized architect, H. Cole. I leaned back in my chair, the steam from my coffee curling in front of me, and pictured the boardroom 6 miles away where the air had just shifted from confidence to fear. At Stratus Financial Group, Thursday mornings belonged to the quarterly review. That was when the most powerful people in the company gathered in a glass-walled conference room to be dazzled by forecasts and projections, the very ones I had made possible for more than a decade. This time, Ryan Blake walked into that room certain he was about to impress the board with streamlined insights. I could almost see him smoothing his tie, adjusting his cufflinks, pretending the weight of those eyes did not rattle him. But when he tapped the tablet to open the forecast, the room did not fill with the smooth blue graphs they were used to. Instead, the projector bled with bold red letters. Access denied. Authorized architect, H. Cole. The silence that followed must have been unbearable. I imagined the shuffle of papers, the stiff cough of a board member clearing his throat, the uneasy glance of an assistant trying to disappear into the wall. Then, the inevitable question. Where are the numbers? That voice would have been Victor Ramirez, 61 years old, a partner who had lived through enough market crashes to smell trouble before anyone else. His tone, gravelly and sharp, could freeze a room. And Ryan, standing there with his tablet flashing my name in front of him, had no answer. Downstairs, the IT department would already have been in chaos. I had trained Rachel Owens, a sharp manager with the kind of brain that never stopped questioning. She knew better than anyone that this was not a glitch. The logs would have told her everything. 17 failed login attempts, encryption protocols engaged, and biometric clearance required. And she would have been forced to deliver the truth. The system could not be bypassed without destroying 12 years of predictive behavior, data logic, and the intelligence that made Stratus more than just a collection of spreadsheets. I pictured Ryan trying to spin it, his smile stretching too tight, his voice straining as he assured the board this was nothing more than an outdated permissions issue. But boardrooms are not kind to weakness, and I knew they could smell it on him. The temperature in that room must have dropped 10 degrees, the kind of cold that comes not from air conditioning, but from the sudden realization that millions of dollars of decisions were hanging in midair, with no foundation beneath them. And as the panic spread through those walls of glass, I sat calmly in my living room, listening to the hum of my refrigerator and the faint call of a bird outside my window. The storm had arrived, and Ryan Blake was standing in the middle of it without an umbrella. By Friday morning, the panic inside Stratus Financial Group was no longer a whisper. It was a current running through every floor of the building. I did not need to be there to feel it. The logs told me everything. Failed credential, override denied, attempt blocked. Each line carried a timestamp, and each timestamp was like the toll of a bell that reminded them of me. The irony was sharp. 14 years I had worked quietly in those walls, hardly noticed except when something needed fixing. But the second my name flashed across their screens in red, I became the loudest voice in the company, even though I was not physically there. I watched from my kitchen table as the mirrored feeds revealed the chatter slipping into their internal channels. Analysts were cautious at first. One message read, "Does anyone know why the lockout screen shows Hannah's name?" The reply came quickly. "She built the forecasting engine. That is why." After that, silence. The kind of silence that says everyone knows the truth, but no one dares to put it in writing. That was the moment my absence became power. They could not ignore me anymore, not when the entire company was staring at evidence of what I had created and what they had destroyed by letting me go. Ryan Blake must have been unraveling by then. I imagined him in his corner office, blinds half closed, sweat beating at his temples while he barked half answers into his phone. Men like him believe arrogance can hide ignorance, but arrogance is paper thin when the numbers refuse to appear. I could almost hear his voice as he tried to calm the finance team, insisting it was a permissions error or some relic from the past, something he would streamline by the end of the day. But deep inside, he knew. He had walked into a minefield blind, and every step was blowing up beneath him. Meanwhile, my phone began to light up in ways it had not for years. LinkedIn requests from colleagues who once dismissed me as Quiet Hannah now filled my inbox. Old supervisors sent polite emails with subject lines like, "Hope you're doing well," and "Quick question." Even Greg from operations, who once called me invisible, forwarded a meme of a dumpster fire with the caption, "Guess what they are watching in the boardroom today?" I laughed out loud, not because I wanted revenge, but because the irony was too perfect. For years, they ignored the hand that kept the engine running, and now that hand was gone, they were lost in the dark. As the hours ticked on, I felt something shift inside me. It was not joy, not triumph, but a quiet kind of justice. The truth was finally visible, and I did not need to speak a word. My absence was doing all the talking. The system was reminding them who had kept them afloat all these years, and every failed attempt was like a signature in red across the boardroom screen. They had tried to erase me, but now my absence had become the most powerful presence in the company. It was late Friday evening when the call finally came. The house was quiet. My daughter was asleep upstairs, and I was sitting on the couch with a blanket over my lap, the soft hum of the dishwasher filling the silence. My laptop sat open on the coffee table, still showing the mirrored log feed. The clock had ticked down to less than 12 hours before the full system lockout became permanent, and yet I felt no rush. The company was unraveling on its own, and I was content to let the process play out. That was when my phone lit up. No caller ID, just the sterile gray glow of a blocked number. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then I answered. For a moment, there was only breathing on the other end, heavy and controlled, the sound of someone carrying the weight of too many hours and too many mistakes. Then came the voice I had expected, but still relished hearing. "Hannah," he said. It was Michael Turner, 58, the CEO of Stratus Financial Group. His voice, usually calm and commanding, carried something different this time. "Strain. I know this is not protocol," he said, "but protocol is not working right now." I said nothing. I let the silence stretch, because silence is not weakness when you know the other side is desperate. He exhaled. "The board is still here. They have been waiting all day. And the only thing we can pull up from the forecasting model is your name in red with 2 words underneath it. Access denied." He paused as if the words themselves had weight. "Explain." I looked out my window at the empty street below, the glow of the street lamp casting long shadows on the sidewalk. I could have explained in a dozen ways, but explanation without leverage is charity. And I had no intention of giving charity to a man who had let arrogance steer his leadership. So I spoke slowly. "That depends," I said. "Do you want a short-term fix or a permanent solution?" The silence on the other end shifted. Not defensive, not angry, but calculating. I could almost hear the boardroom in the background, the shuffling of papers, the murmur of impatient voices waiting for him to bring back a miracle. Finally, he spoke. "I am listening." That was the moment I knew the balance had tipped. For the first time in 14 years, I was not the quiet one waiting for direction. I was the one holding the reins. I took a slow sip of my wine, savoring the quiet power in my hands, and let him wait just long enough for the gravity of it to sink in. Then I answered with steady certainty. "Your new CFO made a mistake. You trusted him to streamline what he did not understand. And now your company is flying blind into Q4 with 3 acquisitions pending and no reliable forecast. If you want this fixed, it will not be through shortcuts. It will be done my way, or not at all." The next morning, I did not rush. I did not put on heels or a power suit. I dressed in a simple navy sweater, slacks, and the same calm expression I wore when I left the building with a cardboard box. There was no need for dramatics. The moment I stepped through the revolving doors of Stratus Financial Group, I felt the energy shift. Conversations dropped to whispers. Eyes followed me like I was a ghost come back to collect a debt. The receptionist froze, her hands hovering over the keyboard. "Is someone expecting you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I gave her a kind smile. They are now. The elevator ride to the 23rd floor was quiet, except for the hum of the cables. When the doors opened onto the executive level, the atmosphere hit me like a physical force. Assistants darted back and forth with phones pressed to their ears, the panic in their eyes hidden poorly behind professional masks. The boardroom door stood open at the end of the hall, and I walked toward it without hesitation, my laptop under my arm. When I entered, the energy snapped taut like an overstretched wire. The board members sat in silence, their expensive suits creased from a night too long and too tense. At the far end of the table sat Ryan Blake. His face was pale, his jaw clenched, his hands wrapped tightly around a notepad he had not written a single word on. He did not look at me. He stared at the table as if eye contact might break him in half. Michael Turner, the CEO, rose from his chair. "Thank you for coming," he said, his tone careful but carrying relief like a hidden undercurrent. I nodded and placed my laptop on the table. "I will not waste your time," I began, my voice steady, my presence filling the room more than it ever had when I was just the quiet analyst in the background. You are here because the forecasting system did not fail. It did exactly what it was designed to do. Protect itself from negligence. I tapped a few keys, and the projector lit up with the architecture of the system. Lines, layers, and locks filled the screen. This is not a spreadsheet. It is a living structure of predictive modeling, 12 years of intelligence tied to biometric clearance. I paused, letting their eyes trace the complexity. Mine. I clicked again and pulled up the audit log. 19 failed access attempts. Each one logged, time-stamped, and rejected. Each one tied to your new CFO. Heads turned toward Ryan. He shifted in his chair, his lips parting as if to defend himself, but no words came. Michael Turner's voice cut through the silence. Ryan, you are finished. Effective, immediately. There was no debate, no hesitation. The security director was already at the door, waiting. Ryan stood, his shoulders slumped, his tie askew, and walked out without a word. The sound of his footsteps was the only noise in the room until the door closed behind him. I turned back to the board. Now, I said calmly, shall we talk about restoring access? The boardroom was silent after Ryan left, the air heavy with the realization that the man they had trusted to lead had been nothing more than a child playing with matches in a room full of gasoline. All eyes turned back to me, and for the first time in 14 years, they were not dismissive glances skimming over a quiet asset. They were eyes that carried weight, waiting for me to speak, waiting for me to save them from the hole they had dug. I took a steady breath, tapped my keyboard, and the projector flickered to life again. The dashboard came alive with charts, revenue arcs, churn curves, and expense forecasts, blooming across the screen like spring after a long winter. The numbers were real, accurate, alive, everything they had been desperate for. A wave of relief moved through the room as though the company itself had just taken its first full breath in days. The CEO leaned forward, his voice lower now, softer. We would like you reinstated, Hannah. Title of your choosing, direct reporting line to me, and significant compensation. You will have the resources you need to document, expand, and scale this system. Another board member, an older man who had barely looked at me in the past, added, no interference, no middle management, no barriers. You answer only to this table. I looked around at them. These people who once skimmed past my slides, who labeled me steady and reliable, as if those were weaknesses. Now, they sat waiting, humbled, their empire balanced on the words I would choose next. For a moment, I thought about all the years I had sacrificed. Holidays spent in front of glowing screens, weekends lost to deadlines, birthdays celebrated with vending machine coffee because a quarterly report was more important than cake. I thought about the humiliation of carrying out that cardboard box, about the smug smile Ryan wore as he handed me my execution in 4 words. And then I thought about this moment, sitting in the same room, with every eye finally seeing me for what I was. The architect, the engine, the keystone. I closed my laptop with a soft click, the sound echoing like a gavel. Then I walked to the empty chair at the head of the table. My seat now. I set my laptop down, smoothed the crease in my sleeve, and looked around the room. Let us get those quarterly reports done, I said evenly. No anger, no triumph, just quiet authority. Heads nodded around the table, respect radiating where dismissal had once lived. Inside, I did not feel rage or vindication. I felt something deeper. Satisfaction. The kind that comes when the world finally recognizes what you knew all along. They had tried to erase me, but in the end, I was the only name that mattered. Power does not always roar. Sometimes it sits in silence, waits for its moment, and when the time is right, it takes the seat at the head of the table and never gives it back. Here is what I learned. Quiet is not weakness, it is leverage. Authority is not ability, results are. Build systems that protect the truth and let the truth protect you. Which moment hit you hardest? The 4 words, the red screen, or the seat at the head of the table? Tell me in the comments. Share this with someone who needs a win, and follow the Karma Files for more stories that turn setbacks into strategy.